Content marketing is definitely hot at the moment, which is interesting and a little scary. I think good content marketing has always been around. The best advertising has always had a good focus on storytelling, engagement. Some of the key ingredients of good content marketing. But I think the difference is previously when people thought about brand marketing, they tended to focus much more on the more tightly defined area of getting your brand message across in a quite direct way, taglines, headlines, and so on. And content was something maybe somewhat separate, in that there's lots of other content that people always publish, but it wasn't necessarily seen as marketing. So I think the interesting thing at the moment is the fact that a much wider range of content has come into this orbit of marketing, and I think that's very healthy, because I think it's useful to make sure that you're getting your brand messages across with a much wider range of formats, using storytelling, using games, using profiles, using all of the different types of content that people are interested in. The slightly scary bit about it is that, of course, advertising tends to be more tightly controlled. You can kind of set it up to begin with, and it's much easier to scale it and to control it and to police it. Content, because you have to produce it on a much more regular basis, is more of a flow, it's much more diverse, is much more difficult to control from a brand point of view. So I think you need to be somewhat looser in your approach. So I like to think of it almost as the kind of laid back younger cousin of advertising. Advertising is kind of that rather a little bit uptight sometimes, which is where you get all the policing. Content marketing needs to be more free flowing, storytelling, playing. I mean, you've got to play around with it a bit to really get it to work, because you've got to try things for the first time, and sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. But it's definitely hot at the moment. It's a really interesting, challenging area, but also one that's really ripe with opportunities. For some people, content is seen largely as a social phenomenon, and that's largely because I think when you're trying to populate your social pages with something, you largely think of that as content and not necessarily advertising or marketing. So I think they've got a general view of it, but I think actually it pays to take a broader view, and it doesn't take too long to get people thinking of content in wider terms, because when they start thinking about all of the things they have on a career site, all of the things that they publish, the stories they tell internally, the things that they push out through PR, or things that relate to their customer marketing or product marketing, you can begin to quite quickly understand that there's a whole world of content here. And for you to think about it in a more strategic way, it soon becomes content marketing. The real challenge with content marketing is getting good quality content. If you think about advertising, the typical advertising process, and some of the other vehicles for more conventional brand marketing, it tends to have quite a long lead time, lots of planning involved, often quite high production. Lots of attention to the small details. It's well researched. Every item is looked at in quite given quite close attention. As I said, content is looser than that. So you haven't got all of that planning and lead time and necessarily that attention to detail. So that's what makes it more challenging and a bit more difficult, because to generate quality content in the volume that you often require, and to keep the flow of it going, requires a lot more ongoing attention, and that's always going to be difficult. The other thing, of course, is with content, and to some extent it relates to advertising and marketing generally, is the way in which you've got to keep some overall consistency, otherwise you lose brand integrity, but at the same time you've got to tailor it and localize it much more, because particularly with stories and some of the more kind of general forms of content, people are looking for things that are much more specific to their interests, to their needs, to their location, to their job role, etc. And getting that balance right between tailoring things so you're meeting the audience interest, but at the same time keeping brand consistency is difficult. It's a real challenge. I think the biggest mistakes with content marketing are focusing perhaps a little too much on things that are just engaging. And I have this joke around that, the three biggest things on the internet which are engaging tend to be, celebrities, cuddly animals, and babies. And if you put those out on the net or you create content around those things, they tend to be widely shared. And if you look at the long list of things that do very well and are viral, actually that covers a large proportion of them. There are other things which, from a career perspective, could be good fun and they're quite engaging in a general sense. But I think where people get it wrong sometimes is not also thinking about how it's also conveying the right brand associations. Because you've got to get both right. It's got to be engaging, but at the same time it's got to engage people around the right things and leave the right impressions. Not just the general impression of being a fun, engaging organisation, but also getting messages across about innovation or flexibility or development or some of the other key things and associations you want to leave people with. What organisations need to be doing more of is really thinking much harder about the content they already have, because many organisations have a large amount of content really, and how they bring that together and serve it up, leverage it in a more kind of effective and thoughtful way. Because I think there's lots of content around. Is it necessarily serving a specific purpose around building the brand? Not really. But you can give it more thought, be a bit more strategic about it, and get a lot more from it. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that, and it's a big challenge at the moment, but I think is going to be a big opportunity for more organisations, is getting employees involved in generating content as well. Lots of people do it quite naturally now. They're doing it on Facebook. They're posting things on YouTube. They're sharing things, and they're doing that in their private lives. Actually, there are quite a few people who are very engaged by what they do at work, and just kind of flipping the switch, giving people the opportunity, allowing them, giving them the freedom, enabling them to do that in a more work-related sense, I think is a big opportunity, and organisations can do a lot more, especially as some of the apps that are now available, which can be controlled by the centre, by the corporate communications team, can fire out requests, can bring content back in, which can then be curated and redistributed. Some of those apps that are coming through are really powerful. Employer branding and content marketing really are part and parcel of the same thing, really. I mean, I think if you think of employer branding, there are some aspects of it which are to do with identity, the kind of look and feel of you as an employer. That's one side. There are also some key messages you want to get across that are part of your proposition, which is part of that branding piece if you're doing it right. There is some advertising and conventional marketing that's attached to it, but everything else around that is actually what really brings employer branding to life. And I would incorporate, and this is a really broad description in terms of content, not just the things you communicate in terms of stories and text and video, but also the activities and events that you do within the organisation. Good content marketing from an employer brand point of view is also how you manage your onboarding process. It's how you package up your learning and development. It's how you package up your performance management appraisals. All of that truly should be part of the employer brand mix. And I think the organisations who are getting all of that right, really integrating the whole thing, thinking about content but also thinking about experience, are the ones who are really building the strongest employer brands.